Samuel. I got a kick out of this because I was thinking about it, and I wasn't planning on reading the verses, but Anna told me that she had looked at first chapter of 1 Samuel last week, and she saw those names there in the first verse, and she said, "I want to hear those." So we're going to look at them just for a moment, and just in a moment anyway. And you're right. Those not 50-cent words. Those 75-cent words right there, if anything. But yeah, that's right. But we'll get to that just in a moment. We're going to look at just some selected verses as we go through this. But the first thing you need to understand about 1 Samuel and the book of Samuel is that 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, 1 Kings, 2 Kings, 1 Chronicles, 2 Chronicles, all those are what's called dual books, the dual books of the Bible. And 1 Samuel was originally written as one book, and then it was divided into two, so therefore we have it was a single literary unit, but now we have two books. And the same thing with Kings. They were originally one work, and Chronicles one work as well, but they were divided into two books. They were paired books by the translators of the Septuagint, which of course is the Greek version of the Hebrew Bible. One thing that you need to understand in relation to the three books, First Samuel deals with Samuel, who is the last judge, and also Saul. And that's very important to understand. A lot of people think 1 Samuel has a lot to do with David. Well, David's introduced here, but David is not the main character of 1 Samuel. Samuel, and who was the last judge, and Saul the first king. That's the emphasis in 1 Samuel. 2 Samuel surveys King David, of course. It surveys King David's reign. Another thing that will help you, and I'll say more about this too when we get into Kings and Chronicles. 1 Kings deals with the reign of Solomon. Covers about 120 years in time frame. But in chapter 11 of 1 Kings, there is a civil war. And from there on, you read about the 10 tribes. There were 12 tribes, 10 of the tribes, the civil war, they became the north, known as, of course, Samaria. And you have the time of the divided kingdom during this time, and the two southern tribes. Jerusalem was, when you read Jerusalem, you read about the two southern tribes. And that becomes very, very important when you're looking at Kings and Chronicles, because you're seeing who they're talking about. When the Bible talks about Israel, they're talking about the northern 10 tribes. When the Bible talks about Judah, they're talking about the southern 2 tribes. Okay, and that becomes important, and we'll see how that gets in and comes into play as we look at Kings. And Chronicles is pretty much a repeating of significant events of Samuel and also the book of Kings. So you have 1 and 2 Samuel, 2 Samuel dealing with David, and then 1 and 2 Kings, and that's where you have the divided kingdom. And it gets kind of confusing for a lot of people who study the Bible, because you need to understand who they're talking about. And then Chronicles, of course, as I said, is a repeating of events, basically, in Samuel and Kings. Um, and again, that becomes very, very important. So what we're dealing with tonight with 1 Samuel is you have two individuals that are the main characters here. Samuel, who of course is the last judge, and Saul, who is the first king. So please keep that in mind. Even though David is mentioned, as I said, he is not a main character in this book. Okay, and another thing too that you need to understand concerning 1 Samuel. When the book begins, there is people have a new hope about them. There's a lot of public trust. There's a lot of public confidence in the leaders and in the nation. And you see that during the time of Samuel through the first 12 chapters, but then after that, something happens. When Saul comes on the scene and he is the first king, you see that public trust that had increased so much and was so powerful. You see that public trust of the people just continue to fall. The public trust and confidence in the leaders just declines. And that's very important. Everything is on the upbeat for the first half of the book, and then the last part of the book, everything is on the decline. And another thing too that I noticed about Samuel. Remember, and I'll never forget what Jeanette told me about reading in the last chapter or two of Judges, just how mean and how cruel and how vicious it was. Well, there was a lot of carnality when 1 Samuel opens up. There's a lot of demonic activity, and it begins to decline. It begins to decline. But then, during the second part of 1 Samuel, all of a sudden, because of something that Saul did, you see the increase of that demonic activity. Saul seeking the counsel of the witch of Endor is a prime example of that. So, public trust and confidence was here, and it builds up all during 1 Samuel. Then all of a sudden, it falls back down again. It builds up almost immediately, and public trust and confidence is there. And then all of a sudden it declines. And that's important to understand when you look at 1 Samuel. These are little things that when you take your time and you read these chapters in future study, that I think you need to understand. There is no public trust. It builds up very quickly, gets to a high point when Samuel's there, and then all of a sudden, when Saul comes on the scene, poof, it's gone. And again, that's very, very important. One thing that and I think I put it in your outline too, that you need to truly understand is this, is that the central message of it is basically the people demand a king. They demand a king, and that becomes very important. They want to go from a theocracy to a monarchy. And that's when the public trust goes from all-time high. It starts decreasing. All right, just with those couple things said, when you look at 1 Samuel, the first 12 chapters spotlight Samuel. Chapter 1, his birth. Chapters 2 and 3, his call and his service under Eli. Chapters 4 through 7 deal with his leadership over Israel. And then chapters 8 through 12 have to do with his supervision and then the transition from the theocracy to a monarchy. Okay? And then the rest of the book, chapters 13 through 31. It really traces maybe a couple of moments of triumph, but mainly the tragedy of Israel's first king. Saul is appointed by God, and then in chapters 13 through 16, he is rejected by God for his disobedience to God. And this final rebellion, Saul continues against God in chapters 17 through 31, which we studied in the life of David, is where David is pursued by Saul. And again, we looked at that in quite a detail when we looked at the life of David. Okay. So again, David is involved in this, but it's basically about Samuel and it's basically about Saul. David has, he is the main character in 2 Samuel. Okay? Now, let's look at a couple of these things in a little bit of detail. In chapter 1, Samuel's birth. Now, I'm going to read to you, and I'm going to break these places down and names down according to syllables, okay? And this is fun. How would you like to have this name? Look at verse 1. Now there was a certain man of this town of Ramath am Zophim. Ramath am Zophim. A man of Ramath am Zophim. Now, how would you like to put that on your where you're from? Of Mount Ephraim, and his name was Elkanah, the son of Jeroham, the son of Elihu, the son of Tohu, the son of Zuph, an Ephraite. And he had two wives. The name of one was Hannah, and the name of the other Peninnah. And Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. And I'm reading this because that's very important. She had no children. Okay? No children. If you look at verse 19, Hannah prays and says, God, if you give me a child, I will commit that child to you. I will commit that child to you. Look at verse 19. And they rose up in the morning early and worshiped before the Lord and returned and came to their house to Ramah. And Elkanah knew Hannah his wife, and the Lord remembered her. He remembered her. Wherefore it came to pass, when the time was come about after Hannah had conceived, that she bare a son, and she called his name Samuel, saying, because I have asked him of the Lord. The name Samuel basically means heard by God. Heard by God. And then look at verse 24. And when she had weaned him, she took him up with her, with 3 bullocks and 1 ephah of flour and a bottle of wine, and brought him into the house of the Lord in Shiloh. And the child was young, and they slew a bullock and brought to the child to Eli. And she said, O my Lord, as thy soul liveth, my Lord, I am the woman that stood by thee here praying unto the Lord. For this child I prayed, and the Lord hath given me my petition, which I ask of him. Therefore, Also I have lent him to the Lord. As long as he liveth, he shall be lent to the Lord. And he worshipped the Lord there. When he was weaned, about the age of 3, probably, she makes about a 15-mile journey. She brought 2 sacrifices to the tabernacle, a bull for slaughter and also a son for God's service. And she offered both of them with joy because God had turned her barrenness. And you have to remember, barrenness was something that was very difficult for women to live with during that time. He turned her barrenness into a blessing. And she said, I will give this child to the Lord. And she did. She gave the child to the Lord's service. And so now Samuel will be a blessing to other people by serving in the tabernacle and speaking on behalf of the Lord. Now, chapters 2 and 3, as I said earlier, have to do with his Samuel's faithful service and his special call in his life. But there was a problem. Many of you know the story. But Eli the priest had 2 sons who were, according to verse 12, they were worthless. If you look at chapter 2, verse 12, they're worthless. The sons of Eli were sons of Belial. They knew not the Lord. They didn't know the Lord. And so they gorged themselves. Instead of offering sacrificial meat to the Lord, they would gorge themselves on the meat, the choicest portions of the meat. They defiled the tabernacle by having sex with women who served there. I mean, they were worthless sons. And Eli disapproved of his son's activities, but Eli didn't do anything. He did not do anything to try to stop them. And he was very passive in the way that he raised his sons. And this passivity of Eli resulted in God's judgment on his family. Look at verse 18. But Samuel ministered before the Lord, being a child girded with a linen ephod. Moreover, his mother made him a little coat and brought it to him from year to year when she came up with her husband to offer the yearly sacrifice. And Eli blessed Elkanah and his wife and said, the Lord give thee seed of this woman for the loan which is lent to the Lord. And they went into their own home. And the Lord visited Hannah so that she conceived and bare 3 sons and 2 daughters. And the child Samuel grew before the Lord. Verse 22. Now Eli was very old and heard all that his sons did unto Israel, and how they lay with the women that assembled at the door of the tabernacle, the congregation. And he said unto them, now why are you doing that? Why do you do such things? I hear of your evil doings by all this people. Why are you doing it? He didn't do anything to try to stop them. But this is where Samuel was growing up. This is what Samuel was surrounded with. And you need to understand that. This is a very important part of his early development. He sees this. He's growing up in this. But he served God faithfully. And that's a good lesson for us. No matter what we're surrounded with, we can serve God faithfully. And God had marked Eli's family for judgment, but he blesses Samuel's. Anna had 5 more children. She had 5 more children. Look at chapter 3, verse 11. And the Lord said to Samuel, behold, I will do a thing in Israel at which both the ears of everyone that heareth it shall tingle. In that day I will perform against Eli all things which I have spoken concerning his house, which When I begin, I will also make an end. For I have told him that I will judge his house forever for the iniquity which he knoweth, because his sons made themselves vile, and he restrained them not. He restrained them not. Look at verse 19. And Samuel grew, and the Lord was with him, and did let none of his words fall to the ground. And all of Israel, from Dan even to Beersheba, knew that Samuel was established to be a prophet of the Lord. And the Lord appeared again in Shiloh, where the Lord revealed himself to Samuel in Shiloh by the word of the Lord. So God speaks to this very young Samuel. And in verses 19 through 21, he publicly here confirms him as his prophet. His prophet. And chapters 4 through 7 basically tell us that he walks, it has to do with he walks with God. And it deals with his leadership over Israel. But I want you to look at chapter 8 a minute. Chapter 8. This is where you have the transition to the monarchy. Chapter 8. Samuel grew older. And the time came for him to pass leadership to another. And he hoped it would be his sons, who he had appointed as judges. But his sons were taking bribes. So they were not upholding justice at all. And so what do you do? And the people had an answer for that. Look at verse 1 of chapter 8. And it came to pass when Samuel was old that he made his sons judges over Israel. Look at verse 3. And his sons walked not in his ways, but turned aside after lucre and took bribes and perverted judgment. Then all the elders of Israel gathered themselves together and came to Samuel and to Ramah and said unto him, look at verse 5, and said unto him, Behold, thou art old, thy sons walk not in thy ways. Now make us a king to judge us like all the nations. Samuel was a good leader, but he had a weakness there. And you see that in the first part of this, about his sons. And there's 3 reasons they wanted to go from a theocracy to a monarchy. Samuel was old. His sons were corrupt. And they wanted to be like all of the other nations. We want a king. We want a king. Look at verse 6. But the thing displeased Samuel when they said, Give us a king to judge us. And Samuel prayed unto the Lord. I like that. They say all this stuff to Samuel, and what does Samuel turn around and do? He went and tattles on them. He went and told the Lord on them. Look at verse 7. And the Lord said unto Samuel, Hearken unto the voice of the people and all that they say unto thee, for they have not rejected thee. Samuel, they didn't reject you. But they rejected me. They've not rejected thee, but they have rejected me, that I should not reign over them. Samuel, they didn't reject you. Samuel, I am the king, but they don't want me. They rejected me. Look at verse 9. You want a king? Okay. Verse 9. Now therefore hearken unto their voice, howbeit yet protest them solemnly unto them, and show them the manner of the king that shall reign over them. Now, It's one, and I wrote this on my paper here. You better watch what you ask for. They want a king? Fine. They're going to get a king. And it goes on all right, you want a king? Okay, here's what's going to happen. He's going to rip you off. Okay? He'll take the best of your sons and daughters and he'll put them into slavery to feather his own nest. That's going to happen. Okay? He's going to rip you off, number one. Number two, he's going to take the best of your sons and daughters and put them into slavery. Number three, he will tax you to 10, 12, 15, 20% of your income. And also, you will live to regret the day that you asked for a king. But you can have a king if you really want one. But this is what's going to happen. Are you sure you want a king? And that's what Samuel talks to him about. But it didn't change their mind whatsoever. He's going to rip you off. He's going to do stuff to your family. You're going to be taxed. You sure you want a king? He didn't change their mind. So God allowed the people to have their way. And they chose to be led by an earthly king rather than by a judge whom God would choose and send to them. Well, who do they choose? They choose a very impressive man. Look at chapter 9, verse 2. Talking about Saul here. And he had a son whose name was Saul, a choice young man, good-looking man, tall, dark, and handsome. And there was not among the children of Israel a goodlier person than he. From his shoulders and upward, he was higher than any of the people. Big, tall, strapping young man. Probably good looking. Tall, dark, and handsome. And they looked at the externals, didn't they? Well, but look down at verse 21. You see humility. And Saul answered and said unto him, am I not a Benjamite of the smallest of the tribes of Israel? You see humility. Am my family the least of the families of the tribe of Benjamin? Wherefore then speakest thou so to me? That you see humility there. Look at chapter 10, verse 22. Therefore they inquired of the Lord further if the man should yet come thither. And the Lord answered, behold, he hath hid himself among the stuff. Humility. Tall, dark, and handsome. Somebody with some humility. Yeah. Look at chapter 11, verse 11. He's very courageous. Verse 11. And it was so in the morrow that Saul put the people in three companies. And you see the type of leader he was here, and very courageous. And they came into the midst of the host of the morning watch and slew the Ammonites until the heat of the day. And it came to pass that they which remained were scattered, so that two of them were not left together. He was very courageous. He was very organized. And the people had to be putting their fingers underneath their, what do you call them things? Suspenders. And saying, that's our king right there. That's the guy right there. That's our king doing all of that. You better watch what you're asking for. And now, beginning in chapter 13, you see Saul's real color coming to light. He made three very, very important mistakes. Early in his reign, Saul proved that God was right. He demonstrated that this favorable appearance alone does not make a king. He started doing things his way and not God's way. In chapter 13, look at verse 13. And Samuel said to Saul, Thou hast done foolishly. Thou hast not kept the commandment of the Lord thy God, which he commanded thee. For now would the Lord have established the kingdom upon Israel forever. But now thy kingdom shall not continue. The Lord hath sought him a man after his own heart, and the Lord hath commanded him to be captain over his people, because thou hast not kept that which the Lord commanded thee. He had a disregard of God's commands. And he disregarded God's command all throughout his reign. There was a rash vow that he made that would have even taken his own son's life, Jonathan's life. And again, we talked about that when we studied David. Had not the Israelites had intervened in it. He disobeyed God's orders to wipe out all the Amalekites. But God saw through everything that he did. Look at chapter 15. Look at verse 14. Chapter 15, verse 14. And Samuel said, What meaneth then this bleating of the sheep in mine ears, and the lowly of the oxen which I hear? All right. He was supposed to wipe out the Amalekites, and he did not. Look at verse 22. And Samuel said, Hath the Lord as a great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices, as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than to sacrifice, and to hearken that of fat of rams. For rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness is as iniquity and idolatry. Because thou hast rejected the word of the Lord, he hath also rejected thee from being king. Look at verse 28. And Samuel said unto him, The Lord hath rent the kingdom of Israel from thee this day, and hath given it to a neighbor of thine that is better than thou. He's given it to your neighbor who's better than you are. And that's where that's where David comes on the scene. That neighbor, of course, was this little shepherd boy. Shepherd boy by the name of David. A runt. Young boy, probably a young teenager. Well, chapter 17 through 31, as Saul's rebellion against God, of course, chapter 17, David has his little fight with Goliath and whips up on Goliath real quickly with a sling and 5 smooth stones, and of course the strength of the Lord that was with him. This Philistine champion is now dead, and look what the people did. Chapter 18, verse 7. And the women answered one another as they played and said, Saul hath slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s. And jealousy. Jealousy now is so rampant within Saul. And Saul was very wroth, and the sayings displeased him. And he said, They have ascribed unto David 10,000s. To me they have ascribed but thousands. And what can he have more but the kingdom? And verse 9, and Saul eyed David from that day and forward. He looked at David with suspicion from that day forward. Even tried to harpoon him, as you remember. And David is on the run for 14 years. And that's what the rest of the book has to deal with. You want your king? Fine. Watch what you ask for. But here's the key to this. Samuel, they didn't reject you. They rejected me. I was the king. I'm their king, Samuel. And they rejected me. They rejected me. David, as you know, moved from city to city to try to escape Saul's wrath. Saul was always in constant pursuit of David. David, as you remember, had 2 opportunities to kill Saul, but he did not do so. He refused to do so. Because he said, I don't want to raise my hand against the Lord's anointed. That's the type of person David was. Chapter 28. Look at me with me real quick. Chapter 28. To put it bluntly, all hell breaks loose on Saul. Chapter 28. And here is the key. Remember I told you the demonic activity? It reached a peak here. In chapter 28, look at verse 8. Verse 7, I mean. Then Saul said unto his servants, seek me a woman that have a familiar spirit. Seek me a medium, if you will, that I may go to her and inquire of her. And his servant said to him, behold, there is a woman that hath a familiar spirit at Endor. And Saul disguised himself and put on other raiment. And he went, and the 2 men with him, and they came to the woman by night and said, I pray thee, divine unto me by the familiar spirit, and bring me him up, whom I shall name unto thee. And if you look, and we look at in the first book of Chronicles, book of Chronicles, I think it's chapter 10, says that this is a reason that Saul died. Seeking. I mean, this is the reason he died. The cruel death that he did. Seeking this witch of Endor. First Chronicles says that. It's the reason he died. Look at chapter 31. I mean, he's all messed up. He's like a wild man. He's all messed up. Chapter 31. I'll begin in verse 2. And the Philistines followed hard upon Saul and upon his sons, and the Philistines slew Jonathan and Abinadab and Melchishua and Saul's sons. And the battle went sore against Saul. Didn't go good. And the archers hit him, and he was sore wounded of the archers. Okay? Then said Saul unto his armor bearer, draw thy sword and thrust me through therein, lest these uncircumcised come and thrust me through and abuse me. But his armor bearer would not, for he was sore afraid. Therefore Saul took a sword, and he committed suicide. He took a sword and he fell upon it. He took his own life. The book of Samuel begins with the birth of a prophet, and it ends with the death of a king. In a battle with the Philistines, a wounded Saul took his own life, and his dear son Jonathan, who was David's dear friend, died as well. Look at verse 6. So Saul died, and his 3 sons, and his armor bearer, and all of his men that same day together. And it's all result is the fact that he would not obey the Lord. He wanted to do it his own way. And then rage enveloped, and he seeks a medium. Witchcraft. And it gets to the point that he takes his own life. Okay. Very tragic. Very, very tragic. Well, that in a nutshell is 1 Samuel. Again, you have the last judge and the first king. And the way that the nation went. It went from public trust to public disillusionment. It begins with Samuel's godliness, and there's national hope, there's motivation, there's purity about everything. But when you look at the end of 1 Samuel, you have the apostasy of Saul. You have depression, you have personal despair, you've got suicide. Well, anyway. The people began with renewed hope. Now look what the shape the people are in. 2 Samuel, which we'll cover next week, deals again with David, and I'll share a little bit about that because we covered a lot of that when we did did the life of David. But anyway, the importance of obeying God, and again, be very careful what you ask for. And that relates to a lot of things. Those who are asking for a new pastor, then you might want to be careful about that. I'm just saying. Okay. Be careful what you ask for. No, it's a very good lesson for us to see just how public trust can all of a sudden go into public disillusionment. And we see that all the time in our nation, don't we? A change of leadership and so forth. And it can work both ways. I think so. If you're, and that's what John is trying to tell us in his letter. You need to stay close to him, because if you stay close to him and you're in that close, intimate relationship, you're not going to ask foolish things. You're not going to ask for things for yourself. You're going to ask for things in his will. In his will.
I think Cody had a question.
I was just if Saul died for that specific reason.
Well, again, First Chronicles kind of pinpoints that. You know, that was like the final straw, you could say. That was the final straw. When he went seeking the medium, that was the final straw. Yeah. I mean, he reached the lowest point in his life during that time. Yeah. But again, what I'm hoping to do in this series on Sunday night is just whet your appetite. Give you a little survey of it and whet your appetite. And in your own personal study, sit down and read some of this stuff. Okay? When we get through this, when you go back, and some of you read the Bible through. Well, just don't sit there and read the Bible through. Read and study the Bible, okay? Read and study it. All right. Bow your heads with me, please. Again, I don't want to close the service without giving us the opportunity to be able to respond in whatever way. We have a lot of lessons we can learn from the life of Samuel, the life of Eli. And Eli did nothing with his kids and with his sons, and that proved to be very disastrous. All he basically did was ask them, why are you doing these things? But he did nothing to reprimand them whatsoever. But Samuel grew within that atmosphere. And that's an amazing thing. You need to remember, you can go beyond your circumstances. You can go beyond your surroundings. And you can grow. And that's a good example of that. If anybody has anything to pray about tonight, or any need that you may have, just take it to the Lord at this time, please. Well, again, I hope that maybe there was something there that you had heard maybe and learned for the first time. It's hard to pinpoint just certain things in a little survey like this. But that's all we're trying to do in these lessons is to survey it. All right. Well, we will be dismissed and continue on from there.